The letter you sent to Philip Hammond.
Yeah, I wrote to Philip Hammond and I said to him, please Mr. Hammond, do not take us to war again, world war. And he immediately responded with a pre-prepared, sorry, I'm not sure if my camera's, oh it is. Okay, I'm just trying to say, so this is George Lees talking from Scotland, Professor George Lees. His YouTube channel is Smithsonian Kelsonian, and John Patterson is in East Sussex. John has a deep understanding of the world's divided and brutal history, and what we're going to talk about tonight is the attempts of G8 leaders to take the world back into global warfare, to cover the shame that they have because of their massive financial crimes. So I'm now going to turn my camera on the evidence that we've accumulated on those issues. And John, can you read the email that I sent to Philip Hammond out? Philip Hammond has recently replaced William Hague, who was, as Foreign Secretary, obligated to send receipts even to people who were not his constituents when they had any evidence to bring to bear on the ethnic hatred issues and the issues of geopolitical manipulation in places like Ukraine and Syria, where on our websites and in our YouTube interviews we have explicitly explained that all of the warmongering is perpetrated by people of the magnitude of the Fleming family who ran World War II for profit. That's the Bond authors who live in the tax havens like Richard Branson in Necker, and what they do now is they run companies in Britain, and those companies are dedicated to raising funds to determine the future of Syria, and on the boards of those companies sit people of the magnitude of Sir David Steele, who used to be my former constituency MP and a major factor in the creation of the devolved government and the frauds in the building of the devolved government building in Holyrood, that meant that the whole project ran at 10 times over budget. And so tonight have you got those emails open, John, so that you can just read them out to the public about what I sent to Philip Hammond and how he replied with his computer in its fixed engine mode, which just gave me a robotic reply that we need to worry only about the Islamic terror threat. Have you got my email there?
I don't have it in front of me, George.
Alright, okay. So can you just explain
actually, that email, I copied and pasted it to one of the videos we made, which I sent to you-know-who, my local guy.
Yep.
I don't actually have the transcript in front of me.
So John is now in touch with his own MP. I cannot get in touch with my MP because he locks me out of my office because I know his criminal director numbers in the Ponzi schemes that are run under the name of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited. Michael Kevin Moore was a former director in that. If Michael Moore is indeed the man who's behind the directorship of 80 vastly powerful and wealth making companies in the P&O shipping ferries sector, then he is deeply embroiled in fraud. But because of the issues that we'll be talking to you about later on the frailty of the British Business Register, and it's almost designed so that fraud can thrive in this country, and John and I want to talk about changing that agenda. John, do you want to talk about why William Hague was forced to resign recently and the desert storm that got up around his replacement by Hammond?
Well, basically, you sent him the same email that you sent Philip Hammond, and the fact that he acknowledged it.
No, I sent an email to Philip Hammond pleading to him not to take the world to war again, and I need to find it. I thought you had said to me that you had got that email sourced already, because it's some time ago now. I'm just going to have to search it. And
I can find it, George, because it's it's attached to a video. The only problem is I've just found out when I change Windows, this stops recording.
yeah. Well,
So I don't want to change Windows.
so you've sort of stunned me by declaring that you're already recording when you joined the call, and that's just got me a little bit out of sync. But I'll soon find it. And I don't know who the principal addressee was. That's my only problem. Hammond Philip, automatic reply. Okay, I've got his automatic reply, and underneath that, no, it's not my email, but that must be close to the date. Can you talk, and you know what's happening, can you explain to them about Lord Markham of Ukraine and how geopolitical manipulators from the G8 are entirely making up the stories about President Assad? President Assad is a friend of the West, he's a public school boy, he is a shopping trip member of Tony Blair's delegations to Harrods and the shopping centres in London with his wife. There is no division between them and the rest of the elite world leaders. What they are doing is attempting to brutalise their countries and to take all of their country's sovereignty from them so that they can do what they did to Gaddafi and to Saddam Hussein eventually. And we have made videos, and you have communicated with your local MP Norman Baker about the crimes that Nadhim Zahawi is committing from the House of Commons as his registered business address, with over 12 companies that are dedicated to manipulating the geopolitical situation all around the globe, and in their premises at the House of Commons under Zahawi's directorships they have over £100 million to declare at the bank. It is completely corrupted and everything is turned on its head. They have tried to sue for war crimes in the Kurdish genocide, and that motion has been passed in the Houses of Parliament, and they are now going to take the genocidal claims forward. We know for a fact that the genocide was committed by the Western governments, and all of the transitional regimes which have caved in within 2 or 3 years of their creation are now being destabilised, and we're beginning to think about the bombing campaigns again. America has already engaged. Britain is standing withering around, which is a blessed thing. They're not prepared to do what Tony Blair did as a unilateral decision as the Prime Minister of this country, to take us into Iraq in the first place against democracy's will. Can you just tell them a little bit about your correspondence with your local MP Norman Baker and what you're trying to get him to change?
Yeah, how it started was I basically had enough. So I went down the local police station. I said, listen, I have a moral obligation to report a massive crime. And the next thing, she took a few details. They called me at home, and as I started to explain what I knew, she said, whoa, wait a minute, this is far too sensitive, you know, to be discussed over the phone. We're going to send someone round. So they sent 2 police officers, one from Seaford, one from Lewis. They sat down, and I said, I said, what you're going to hear today, you're never going to forget. And the chap opposite, he said, do you mind if we record? I said, yes, no problem. And then I told him exactly what would happen.
Is that right? That's what they said? Because if you ask someone in their parliamentary constituency office whether or not when you meet your MP whether you can record, I'll bet you get a negative response. You are disallowed from doing any recording in any of Britain's law courts. If you want the information on what anybody said in your case, then you have to buy it back from the court. It is just crooked.
Yeah, they recorded it, And then they gave me a crime number, which was good. So they have it. But then I told them what would happen to this recording once they passed it upstairs. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, when they left, they said, listen, do you mind if we call around just to see if everything's okay? I said, you can call around any time you want. So they said, don't hesitate to contact us and we'll go over this, we'll give it to our sergeant. I said, well, okay, but good luck. So anyway, I contacted them about a week later, no reply. Then I contacted them again. He said, oh, I'm out of the office, contact this other chap, whose name I have. No reply. So I wrote to Norman Baker and I said, listen, I reported a serious crime and to the police. I've just been in touch with them to give them updated, very, very important information. And I know for a fact that they're not receiving my emails. I said it involves massive fraud from warmongering coming right out of Westminster. And he actually replied, dear Mr. Patterson, I am very interested. Please forward to me any evidence you may have. So that was it. I was then invited to supply the evidence, which I did in the form of 2 videos we made. One was exposing Philip Hammond, and the other one was exposing Nadine Zahawi.
That's so excellent, John, because both of those...
That's in their hands now, and the ball is in their court. Fantastic.
Can I read out then the letter that I sent to Hammond? You know, within weeks of his appointment, he replaced William Hague, who was thrown out for several issues. William Hague has been a recipient, and he has sent receipts for all of the emails that myself, Gordon Bowden, Peter Eyre and others have sent to him over the last 4 to 5 years. It's 2010 when they swept into power again. They created the coalition agreement within 2 weeks, and that was so corrupted that they used to negotiate it a chap called Laws, who was a former executive at JP Morgan but also at the Barclays Bank. At the end of that process, they suspended him from the cabinet for a time because he was claiming too many expenses on behalf of his gay boyfriend. And then at the end of the process, the government is able to declare that we've got a plan that will work, and we're going to put our citizens in austerity. And they did not say this out loud, but what they are doing now is they are taking all of the taxpayers' money out of the British Treasury and they are laundering it into the tax havens and into their personal accounts, using the IMF, the World Bank, the ECB and all of the Rothschilds financial institutions to support that. Can I read out the letter that I sent to you in response to your question, are you okay, George? Because John's very worried about my welfare.
Well, because when you disappeared for a few days, I thought, oh, just a minute, I don't like this.
Yeah, he may be in the shallow grave, in other words.
Well, you know.
So let me just read out the letter that I sent to... This went to John, to Evan Davis at Radio 4, to James Naughtie, to James Reynolds, to Mike Wooldridge, to Sarah Montague, to John, to Steve, to John, to Hammond, Philip, and a whole variety of recipients in the media globally, and also to John Lamont, my MSP, who has heard all of our accusations of the massive frauds in Lothian Road in Scotland, but because he's only an MSP, he just throws his hands up and says, George, we cannot confront serious fraud like that because we're only politicians.
Incredible.
Why the hell are they in office if they're unprepared to keep the monies? And this is the Westminster government, and you need to realise that John Lamont is an advisor to Scottish law enforcement and the Law Society up here, but he is also running very strongly in the Better Off Together movement because he fancies the bigger, more prestigious position in London. next time around. Okay, so I'm just going to read out the letter. Dear John Patterson, in brackets, unpaid fraud exposer, I am just fine, but I got my computer shut down when I visited Lord Rothschild's transcript yesterday. Same Rothschild that got our Facebook references frozen on Sunday, so that none of our friends or fraud activists could see Michael Ellis Moore's links to over 80 massive globalised companies in the P&O chain and other massive mail delivery systems that are globalised. And John Robertson writes links to Dubai and the Arab British Chamber of Commerce are now beyond regulation or taxation. I need to explain, this is not in the letter, but John Robertson Wright is a member of the board of the Arab British Chamber of Commerce, and Michael E. Moore and the Borders College from the constituency that Michael E. Moore represents, which is mine, in the Scottish Borders, his business register for those 80 massive globalised companies is not in the UK, it's in Dubai. So no tax is paid, there is no capacity to regulate that, and it is just a massive fraud. Then I'll continue with the letter to John Patterson. Did you know that the Costa Concordia, the ship that was sunk, was owned by subsidiaries of P&O, and that its name in the native language, which is Greek, is a joke about the Ku Klux Klan? Costa Concordia, KKK. So I want to explain first why 40% of Scotland's marriages failed, and how if you are a loyal, loving, heterosexual husband, and so let's skip that bit because it's not about the brutalisation of the innocent world. And we've exchanged information on the fraud with Jim Fetzer, Red Ice Radio, Gordon Bowden, explaining on openly published videos on our corrupted constitutional monarchy, telling us that Philip Hammond is dirty in the fraud sector. The story retells our knowledge on the corruption of British law enforcement and the deployments of the same frauds and money laundering by legal firms whose directors are advisors to government, or MSPs, called John Lamont, advisor to Salmond on law, but openly confirmed that as a politician he cannot confront serious fraud but works for the Better Off Together movement. What I discovered yesterday that crashed my computer I would like to reveal in a video. I want to talk about the globalised fraud and its owners, which Gordon would not let me talk about because of the magnitude of their crimes. And his affiliation to the love of the people for the British monarchy, who are very much embroiled in the financial scams, but not all of that is entirely their fault. John understands how the Rothschilds for centuries have run the breeding bureaus for elites and for the monarchs, so that they have now taken control of every country on the globe. Then I continue with the letter to Hammond. Have you watched the video about the person who got his head cut off by an English-speaking terrorist in the Islamic Brotherhood, covered by John Humphreys this morning, with no references at all to the 1,300 Islam companies that's trading in the UK with the name Islam in their directory listings? The Leumi Bank from Israel, profiting from Gaza campaigners, or Terry Waite's director numbers, and the overlaps with ITV Media Ponzi scams under the control of Lord Hollick of Notting Hill and Sir, which of the Grades is it? Sir Michael Grade. Sir Michael Grade of Yarborough is in charge of the biggest Ponzi scheme that I've ever discovered in my time as a fraud researcher. It takes you all the way into the Caymans and again back into Israel, and it takes you to tax havens globally. The number of subsidiaries and Ponzi's are massive. Every one of them is being run by relatively small corrupted directorial firms. It involves all the celebrities, the manager and the captain of the English football team, David Beckham, and all of the people that are involved at the top of society in this.
That's Sir David Beckham.
Sir David Beckham, yeah.
Who else?
Yeah, and he's on the Olympics and football commissioning bodies that are just out and out profiteers with Martin Sorrell. Let me continue with the letter. The Rothschild man still works as a director and a secretary. They use all the corrupted boiler rooms and laundering crashing methods, but just when I was making slides about the same director listing, the windmill link to Wadsden Manor, where he has registered the company twice under different IDs, the one that was trading has a time access in days rather than years. In other words, one's dormant and it's going to be filled soon, but the other one is the fraudulent rapid transaction that they make to switch the money and to asset strip those companies. They get the funding for those companies from the corrupted bank, and very quickly they take them out of the country so you can have no regulation. I don't want to send you this image or the ones of Frank Bruno boxing joke and Tam Dalyell and the other socialists who are friends of Israel and the Jewish head of the World Bank, Israeli Central Bank and Rothschild director at the company that actually builds the Knesset building for them several decades back, just after World War II was over. And those companies are registered by the Rothschilds in London. You should learn about the war loot in the Victoria and Albert Museum, put there by a man called Gilbert. That's the Gilbert collection, part of the Rothschilds listings, directorial listings, whose real name was changed as he shifted across continents in perfect synchrony with the world wars. Can you remember what his real name was, John?
Bernstein.
Absolutely. His real name is Bernstein, and in brackets, no, not the musician. So drop me a line. We will make the video mid-morning if you are up for this. This is the Rothschild. See corporate document below and the thin blue lines below. Okay? And that's a reference to Crocus Company UK Limited and the directors that prevail there, including Lord Nathaniel Charles Jacob Rothschild. So I tracked him down for a couple of days, and I'm now in a position later on this evening to give you a horrific profiling of the Rothschild financial institutions in the UK and all across Europe, which I discovered last night. We'll talk about that later, and we'll make a separate video about that, but that's just to get...
For some reason, George, Gordon wouldn't go here, would he?
No, that's right, because Gordon was sort of programmed like the people that he talked to me about, like M. You remember him talking about M?
Yes.
And the crimes in the delegation that went to trade the nuclear weapons in the Thatcher regime with David Cameron in the party. They are trained to reveal explicit but relatively trivial crimes, and Greg Hallett explained that to us. If you program people who have vast intellects like Gordon Bowden had, he had a perfect memory to relate to us the stuff that he wanted us to hear.
Absolutely.
But he would not let me talk about the Rothschilds. He would not let me talk very much about General Guthrie from Dundee, who's a NATO field marshal but is on the NN Rothschild Bank for a full decade before Tony Blair makes the decision to rush into Iraq, and he was a Blair life peer. Okay, so we're going to get much more explicit later this evening. I'll just finish off the letter. This is the Rothschild and the thin blue lines below. The thin blue lines refer to the instant corrupted transactions that occur when a company appoints one of its directors and the same person or a related colleague to be the secretary for that company, and within the space of one day they can empty the coffers, or they can crash the banks as they did in 2008 and transfer the money out of the country into undetectable illicit tax havens. Not a cent or a penny in tax is paid in any of the participating countries, and all of the money is returned through the IMF, the World Bank, the ECB and the OECD, and is put back into the elite pockets when it came out of the ordinary tax-paying citizens' impoverished accounts. And that is why so many people now are on the verge of losing their houses. They are defaulting on their gas bills, their energy bills. the rate of inflation in the energy sector for 5 years back to back is 20%. Nick Robinson at the BBC is telling us again this week that inflation is well under control at 2%. It is an outright lie. But then I sent videos, because they've been circulating the 2 cases of the kidnapped victims who are beheaded by English-speaking peoples, and the videos that they have released are idiotically childish. It's absolutely plain to everyone that watches them that it's a fake-up, like the killing of bin Laden and the disappearance of bin Laden's body over the side of a ship so that they could show Hillary Clinton in front of the telly smiling like a Cheshire cat. Yeah, you remember all of that? But let me finish, because what I sent them to try and prick their conscience is a video of the killing of Braveheart in the movie. Yeah? So this is the English government that is accusing the Islamic governments that they entirely created, because you know that all of the messianic religions are a massive fraud to keep people in strife globally since the Pisos wrote the New Testament in the Villa Papyri in Herculaneum in 79 AD, which is the year that Vesuvius exploded onto the Villa Papyri. There is no doubt in my mind at all that there is a God and he watches their every move, which is why the Somerset levels were flooded just near to Portendown and Prince Charles's private residence in Cornwall. Yeah, all of those guys are profiteering. Prince Charles does very little work, as Greg Hallett talked about, but regrettably Greg Hallett has lost his life because he understood how the world fails to work thanks to this tyranny now. And so that was the letter I wrote, and within minutes I got back a response from Philip Hammond MP, who's now the Foreign Secretary, and if you just give me a few seconds I'll try and trace that.
So we now have 2 MPs that have acknowledged our work.
Well, yeah, my MPs are obliged to acknowledge your email. Michael Moore no longer does that because I have his criminal director numbers on potentially 2 massive crimes. The crime at the Westminster Foundation Limited has been acknowledged as a crime not only by me, Gordon Bowden. It involves George Soros and JP Morgan, like the coalition deal in the first place. But when I tried to get a solicitor that was involved ever so peripherally in the frauds in my local region, in John Lamont's constituency of Coldstream, they had to acknowledge that that director was indeed the corrupted director that uses the same laundering tools to take all of the tax-free income for the Law Society members in Scotland out of the country with no implications. They get it back, of course, otherwise they wouldn't be able to buy their groceries from Lidl's. Lidl's a German company, but they don't shop there. They can afford to shop at Sainsbury's or Harrods if they choose to take a junket to London, and they splash out on the money that they've tucked away. Everybody does not understand that, because they're there to tick boxes in the divorce sector or in the assault sector, but they do not understand the implications of the presence on their website or on the company check site of companies called Shelfco 1 to 4. I will not tell you which of the corrupted law companies in Scotland that was, but all of them are at the same game. John Lamont is an advisor, as is Naismith and Stuart Fair, and when you look at what they use for their boiler rooms in the money laundering, they're the same boiler rooms that Gordon Bowden and I have described in Finchley Road. Yeah, it is absolutely massive. It is a massive crime against the world's people, and the world's people just need to stop watching the Bake Off and Kylie on the celebrity programmes and turn their attention to why their kids are being robbed blind in the retail sector and in the university fees sector.
George, quite briefly, just to give people an idea of how long this has been going on. I put a deposit on my first house when I was 22 years old. Okay? I had a regular job. Now tell me, George, how long has this scam been going on?
Oh, I mean, what we're describing goes all the way back to Nixon and beyond. It goes all the way back to World War II. World War II.
No, I'm talking about the actual...
The demonisation of Islam.
No. The actual fraud using these shelf companies that Gordon explained. When you asked him, has this been going on 1 decade, 2 decades? It's been going on for over 3 decades.
Yeah, and it gets more and more efficient every year that passes. So you no longer have to wait for a fiscal cliff to collapse. It's happening every hour of every day in every county in our august country of the United Kingdom.
Now, you do not get young people today, just with regular jobs, buying their own houses. That's what I'm trying to say. All this money has been stolen for a period of over between 30 and 40 years. And yet, the paper trail has been there for decades. And it's there for everyone to see.
Yeah, I still can't find Philip Hammond's response, but I'm going to have to look on my website for it. My website, incidentally, is Prof George Lees, all one word, / Revelations, and the index you can find up in the top right hand corner, and there's a list of topics all the way down the left hand side of that. It's got the illustrations of the documents that we have on all of these crimes. John, can you tell them a little bit about what Zahawi does out of the House of Commons as his registered business address? Which is what you've taken to Baker?
Yes, Zahawi is, he's got a fund of...
He's got over a dozen registered companies.
Several hundred million.
No, it's 100 million. 100 million.
Oh, 100 million.
100 million his registered business address in the House of Commons. That's the House of Commons, where the poor people send their MPs to represent them. Yeah, I'm trying to find this response from Philip Hammond. Can you just tell them about what Zahawi does, and about what Anne Clwyd does, and what the Indict movement does, and about how fraudulent that is, and how he's the representative for Stratford-on-Avon, and how he's running a series of vicious jokes against the world's people by using directors on his registered companies in the House of Commons named Shakespeare. It is just a vicious joke.
That's exactly what it is. It's a vicious joke.
You're going to have to give me more prep time the next time you make a video.
Listen, as I was talking now...
Well, it's a bit disjointed. Let me find the disclaimer from Hammond, which is absolutely twisted. You talk about something else you want to talk about.
No, just basically, it's the 2 videos we made on Richard Hammond and Nadine Zahawi with the actual transcript of George's email is attached in the bottom of it, and those 2 were sent as requested to my local MP Norman Baker, and he's acknowledged receipt. So this is, to me, is excellent news. But where it goes from here, who knows?
Okay, so I've now found that
sent the hit teams in.
So if you want to hear the videos we made closer to that period of time on Hammond's capacity to take the world to war for false accusations about the religious institutions and the messianic religions that we have created globally, because humans are not capable of doing what gods can, but that's why religion has been run that way for over 2,000 years, so that they can profit from everything that the worshippers are prepared to give up, and that includes their lives in the missions, it includes the pilgrimages. And we talked earlier this week, John, about Santiago, which is St. James, and the vicious jokes about the Shining films, and about how much it costs to hire a train across the Pyrenees to the shrine of Santiago, and all of the funds go to the monarchy in Spain, who have been prepared to train the IRA, who have been prepared to be neutral in wartime, and have been prepared to run a revolution like the Syrian situation that we are now in the run-up to World War II, which they strategically stayed out of so that they could launder the cash and the Nazis out of Europe after the war was over. It's ever so clever, it's ever so cowardly, and it is ever so treasonous. And the world is beginning to learn that, which is why William Hague resigned. He's not a physically tough character. He is accused by Abel Danger of laundering young children for paedophilic crimes around the world. Now, I have no interest in whether or not that is correct. That might sound callous of me. I am dedicating all of my time to learning and to exposing how they steal from the world's citizens. Okay, so can I read Hammond's letter in response to that letter that I've just read about the beheading of the victim, and about all of the geopolitical manipulation, about the profiteering that goes on at the Israeli banks when we try and change the Palestinian situation. Okay, in that Palestinian sector there are somewhere between 30 and 40 registered companies of human rights activists, and many of those are involved in feeding the Israeli banks with the proceeds from their protest movement. The people in Gaza have no life, and they have no prospect of a life, because what we do is even the charities and the disaster funds are frauds. Naomi Klein has revealed that articulately. Okay? Threatening receipt from Philip Hammond. Please read it and know that you now know about the profiteering and the brutalisation of the peace-loving nations. Only the SNP are rallying round its impoverished people because they're in a desperate situation, because they know that they are losing in the opinion polls. Yeah, and that's why they're listening so avidly to John Patterson and my videos. They know that if they defame Westminster for their massive crimes, that they're in with a chance. It does not have to be in the current referendum, because what they're running for is just a constitutional monarchy, almost exactly the same, but more expensive for the people than the one that we currently have. There is no change. It is just a fudge, and it is just a token movement led by a banking executive, aka Salmond, who gets all of my emails but responds to none of them, unless you compliment them on something and then they thank you for that cynically. Okay, so this is Philip Hammond's email response to every letter he receives the day that he mentions that we are going to have to do something by way of bombing or something violent to put down the Islamist revolution. Within 2 years, within a year of us pulling our troops out of the Bush and Blair-led campaign to take that country over. Zahawi is a Kurd. He's from Iraq. He now runs the Iraqi transitional profiteering regime from the House of Commons. That's how vicious it is. This is what Hammond's computer replies. The Foreign Secretary is receiving a large volume of emails on Iraq and abuses being carried out by actions by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, in brackets ISIL, I-S-I-L. He regrets that he is unable to reply personally to each one. The Foreign Secretary shares the concerns of many in the UK about the suffering of civilians in Iraq and condemns in the strongest possible terms the atrocities that are being committed by ISIL. Now, ISIL has been created entirely by the Western leaders. Like all of the stuff, what was Bin Laden's movement called?
Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it's just a fake up so they can brutalise Iraq, and following that Afghanistan, after they brought the Twin Towers down and claimed that the Islamic movement led by Bin Laden, who was a very welcome visitor to Cambridge and used to wander round the streets as the member of a filthy rich elite family that most of whom have been educated in the West. Yeah, the letter goes on to say, we have now confirmed reports that ISIL continued to kidnap large numbers of people, mostly women, and yet this is the same stance that Gordon Brown takes. Yeah, he pulls women in that have been demonized by Islam in Pakistan. He gives them some treatment for a hole in the head that they got from a bullet wound in the Royal Birmingham Infirmary. Yeah, where they scammed the 7/7 or the Glasgow bombings using medics out of the same infirmary, and within a few weeks of that operation, Malala is cured, and she's giving the most articulate speeches that young girls from foreign countries could possibly give, despite her massive brain injury. And Gordon Brown thinks that the whole world are imbeciles and they will swallow that storyline. But let me continue with Hammond's letter, who thinks along the same lines. And credible information that women and children are being held by ISIL in a number of locations. We have confirmed reports that some women have been executed, possibly because they refused to change their religion, while others have been sold or allocated as slaves, which is why Haig resigned. Haig and Angelina Jolie are not trying to defend themselves against the accusations that Abel Danger have made, which implies either complicity or absolute criminality in that case. Haig is also a financial criminal, as is his wife and his sister. Yeah, those are involved in crimes involving the Prince's charities, Prince Charles's charities, and various other financial frauds that we have revealed in previous videos and are also portrayed on my website. Okay? We are also receiving distressing reports from displaced persons fleeing ISIL of family separation and their heinous crimes. Yeah, and you know how much I'm fighting on my immoral behaviours up here in Scotland on family separation. I have done nothing immoral in my entire life. They are committing massive war crimes to steal from the world's people, and they think it's really funny to send automated responses from their computer like this. We utterly condemn the acts of horrific violence and slavery reportedly being carried out by ISIL in areas under its control. Yeah, who gives the reports? The BBC, Fox News and Reuters, entirely owned by the Rothschilds and the puppet governments around the world. These are serious, this is back to Hammond, these are serious breaches of the Geneva Conventions, and all parties to the conflict must do everything in their power to prevent them and to protect the civilian population. Yeah, the government is working closely with the United Nations, the Iraqi authorities, aka the people that are now in the House of Commons profiteering from these situations, and international partners to ease the humanitarian situation in Iraq, including providing humanitarian support assistance to displaced people, many of whom have been the victims of ISIL abuses. Have you seen the pages on my websites where that support comes from, John?
I don't believe I have.
The Rothschild Bank and the Bank Paribas that Miss Lagarde is in charge of. You can get a Rothschild flat pack home from the Bank Paribas, and you get a plastic credit card so that when you're in the internment camp you can build up a debt burden before you're starved to death somewhere far from home, and your land and all of what used to be yours has been grabbed by the tyrants from other states. Let me just finish the letter. The government is working closely with the United Nations, the Iraqi authorities and international partners to ease the humanitarian situation in Iraq, including providing humanitarian support, assistance to displaced people, many of whom have been the victims of ISIL's abuses and persecution. Internationally, the UK chaired an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on 7th August to discuss ISIL's attacks and the humanitarian situation. That was around the same time that Report in Scotland was reporting that Islam was recruiting terrorists out of Aberdeen. When you look up on the business registry the word Islam in Aberdeen, you get the directors of several companies who are called in the UK Mr. Islam. It is cynical. All of it is a profiteering exercise, and I don't know whether or not they actually brutalise the countries or they just make fake movies of it, but because what we know about Ingenious Films and the thousands of subsidiaries of that are Ponzi scams and false news vents and money laundering vents, so that the money that is laundered from the various companies, the countries that are involved, cannot be then exposed to regulatory procedures in any country where it ends up, which are actually tax havens, whether they're offshore or onshore, whether they're in mainland America or whether they're in the Channel Islands, as they had traditionally have been out of Britain. It's anybody's pick. There are thousands of havens, there are hundreds of thousands of boiler rooms, and there are only around 5,000 corrupted elites who are manipulating this process. The rest of the 7 billion global citizens get austerity everywhere they go to convene their UN meetings, and this week they are in Cardiff, policed by a massive British police cordon. And when I try and get in touch with Westminster to see if I can reach out to more SNP activists, the SNP have a massive power base in Scotland. In 2010 they won the election with a landslide. The reason there are opposition politicians in the building at Holyrood is they have a concept called a list membership. So if you get elected out and your poor little party is effete enough not to have any representatives in the Parliament building, they give you a few token places, which there are why there is a few Conservatives in there, and which is why there are a few Lib Dems. John Lamont is a Conservative, and he is from a very leafy constituency. He is in denial. He is on the board of Germanic British law firms. He's on the board of another one, I forget what the name of the company is, Mortons I think it is, and he's in denial. He's received all of my written exposes of who's doing what to whom, and what the director numbers are in these corrupted UK companies, what the corrupted director numbers are in the Ukraine, where Lord Markham, who's actually from Rochdale and runs virtual fraud companies from there, which are very close to the Cairn concept but in different companies. His real name is Rayner before he got his life peerage. His business is registered in Ukraine, which is wise Lord Markham of Ukraine. Yeah, and I've told everybody this before, but the day that Prince Charles started to demonise Putin, and you get the joke about Putin, don't you? You know how the New World Order is run by people that are slaves to golf courses, cricket pitches, and to what's the other one? The race course sector, because of the Piso joke and the reliance on the hippos, which is a horse. Yeah, all of the elite jokes about religious fraud, and all the stuff that you got about the golfing competition between who's the black man that had the sexual appetite?
Oh, Tiger Woods.
Yeah, so he was in a very strong argument about Kentucky Fried Chicken and with a Spanish golfer, and they were at each other's throats. It's part of that ancient religious joke, like the one that I told you about the loaves and fishes, which is cutting off a penis, putting it in a loaf of bread surrounded by human feces, and then you ballistically send that back over the surrounded castle that is surrounded by the Roman Empire, and that is the loaves and fishes joke. The penis and the sex on a Friday, the fish on a Friday in Roman Catholicism is a joke about cutting people's penises off and sending it back over the castle walls. Yeah, and you can guess what the second coming is. That's twice in the same evening. It's nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Yeah, it is absolutely vicious. And the messianic religions that the Moors followed, and that the Islamists followed, and that Bin Laden followed, they are all made up by human beings in institutes like Tavistock and the Brookings, and what's the one in London that works with the London School of Economics? Chatham House. Yeah. All of it is pre-planned in elite buildings around the globe, and all of it is designed to displace the people in massive programs, and then they have to get their loan from Miss Lagarde and the Bank Paribas, where she used to work before she became the corrupted head of the IMF. And her message to global citizens is just keep paying your taxes, because we strongly rely on it. We steal from all of that fund income that you gladly give up, and we brutalise the world in return using your cash. I think we should stop there now, but that is the cynical...
Just one more thing about this Lagarde woman.
Yeah.
She was at a press club meeting, and she gave a speech that I've never heard in my life before. She was talking about the year 2014. 2's into 14 is 7. And she was giving people a talk on numerology and the use of 7s. This is Lagarde.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole world is run by Freemasons, and she's lucky to be a woman and a Freemason at the same time. They only let them in relatively recently. You know, the Freemasons are excluded from the elite golf courses around, the women are excluded from the elite golf courses around the world, even today. And you know, in our ride-outs where we commemorate the history of Scottish people being slaughtered in battles like Flodden, and we send people out with tears in their eyes, pretending that we're reenacting what actually took place there. It was just a cull. Just a cull by the elites to get the numbers down. And in the town called Selkirk, where they are particularly romantic about it, they had hundreds of people leave the village to go to Flodden to fight for the Scottish nation. Only 2 came back alive. And they now still get up on a box and celebrate that, but they don't worry anything about what's happening in Syria, because they're too busy having a good time and having a few drinks. There was a gender issue in a town called Hawick, where they would not let women participate in the ride-outs. And you know how women enjoy equestrian events, and that's it. You know, that created a desert storm here, and the men get hopelessly drunk, and now the councils have to follow those pageant-like horses around with the council trucks, because when the horses shit on the pavements, we're so politically correct that it has to be done within 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah, and in the old days, when our ancestors died, there would be heads rolling along those pavements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember as a kid, George, where people used to go out in the streets and shovel that stuff up and put it on their gardens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I frequently go to graveyards, and I get a lot of negative feedback on that from my spouse. But when you go to a graveyard, and if you go there on Remembrance Sunday, you'll see that they say lots of pompous prayers around the Christianity fraud. They name the sacrifice that people have made, but in the local parish, they do not tell you which families were involved in that sacrifice. It is tragic. They only talk about the Queen, the laying of the poppies, and when you saw them this year going to the French coast, where they made that horrible movie with Tom Hanks as the hero of Saving Private Ryan.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I'm so squeamish I could not watch the first 5 minutes of that film. I never have watched it.
That was heavy.
Because I would pass out if I watched it.
It was awful.
But they go there with Prince Philip in the fancy hat and Camilla by his side, pretending that they do not understand why World War II was fought. You and I know exactly why it was fought. It was fought entirely for profit, and the people that profited from it now live in the tax havens but still lead our country, aka Branson, Sean Connery, who's the people that we keep forgetting in the time travel sector?
Oh yeah.
The tenants, and the Tweedsmuirs, and the people who befriended Princess Margaret when she was having her orgies on those same tax havens. And that's why the Snowden story has been released to cover that up. But I was telling you, when Prince Charles was in his vast tracts of land in Canada, he was trying to get Putin defamed as a bigger villain than Hitler ever was. And Hitler trained in Tavistock, as you know. For a time he lived in Liverpool, and even Beryl Bainbridge wrote about that. But what Prince Charles said was that he is a bigger menace to global peace than anybody else on the globe. That man Putin...
But we're supposed to believe it. Yeah.
Well, his name is a joke. His name is a gimme putt on the golf green. It's a putt in. It's an easy putt. Do you get it?
Oh,
it's as simple as that. Put in is a golfing joke at one of the world leaders, because he's a plant. He trained in New Zealand, he killed in New Zealand, but he is a Zionist intel expert, and I've got a lot more respect for him than any other politician on the globe, because he keeps himself physically fit, and I would not fancy my chances in a single combat with him. If it was David Cameron, it would be over in 30 seconds. Little effete shit that cannot do anything for himself. He needs NATO's armies to do it for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that day that Prince Charles made those statements about President Putin, yeah, the World Economic Forum was being held in St. Petersburg in Russia.
Exactly.
That's how hypocritical our news media and our royal princes are. And you know all about Greg Hallett's sacrifice on Prince Charles's family and the absolute illegitimacy of their bloodline. And that is why Gordon Bowden dropped out, because he knows how much fondness Britain have for the monarchy, because they just sweep over the sacrifice that the ordinary people made in World War I and World War II, and they actually forget that world history is written by the victors, and the victors in World War II were in Berlin, in London and in Washington. They were all on the same side, and when they met in the summits in Yalta and in different places around the world, in Iran as well, and in Southeast Asia where Chiang Kai-shek attended, they were in the presence of Beaverbrook, who wrote all of the false news as head of the munitions industry in the aircraft sector. That man, like Bonar Law, was not even a British citizen. He's a Canadian. He killed to get to the top of the business tree in Canada, and he very quickly became the head of the Daily Express. And if you now want to read the World Archive, you have to pay a subscription for it. Yeah, you cannot get those secrets by searching for them on the search engine. And Prince Charles, because he's such a deceitful character, and he's prepared to say things about Putin, yeah, which are just a lie about where the Economic Congress is, he has immunity from publication with any communication that he makes with politicians or the British media for 70 to 100 years. It is pathetic, and we are on the verge of World War III, and I have more respect for William Hague, because William Hague was in power in the Foreign Office when we made the decision not to brutalise Syria on that chemical weapons attack, which was reported and confirmed by a woman called Angela Kane, who is actually the head of the chemical weapons delegation, but her training is at the World Bank.
You just couldn't make it up, could you, George?
Well, they do make it up. Every news bulletin you see is made up. Every interview that you and I make is the absolute truth, and we've got the business directorial registrations and all of the corporate structures that back that up, including the ones on ISIS, ISIL and the Leumi Bank in Israel, profiting from the situation in Palestine. Shall we stop there?
I think this is fantastic stuff, George.
I want to make a new video on the Rothschilds and the magnitude of the Rothschilds' presence in Britain and in Europe in the next few minutes, if you'll allow me to.
Yeah, definitely. While we're still walking.
Okay. Thanks, John. I'll just turn the recording off for a few seconds.
Yeah. Cheers. Yeah.